Hi everyone, I'm Kaluka. As of Season 10, I started playing Apex Legends, and I've come to really enjoy it. The game is quite fun in my opinion, and whenever I find a game that's quite fun, I usually try to play it competitively and pay attention to its competitive scene. And I was surprised to find that one of the characters in the game, Gibraltar, had an over 90% pick rate in competitive Apex. Now, considering the roster is as expensive as it is, and that this pick rate is so astronomically high, I was convinced that Gibraltar must of course need some kind of nerf because he's broken. Having played the game, I knew that Gibraltar was always a very strong character and was basically a safe choice on any team, but I've come to find that it's not actually Gibraltar's strength that's putting him at such a high pick rate. It's more so what he does for the scene, and how he impacts competitive Apex that leads to his pick rate being so high, and I'm convinced now that after having seen a few games, I don't think that Gibraltar should actually be nerfed. And throughout this video, I'd like to explain why. First off, let's talk about Gibraltar and what makes him so good. Gibraltar is effectively a perfect Apex character. He provides exactly what teams need in every single way. He's a character who provides excessive utility to his team. First off, let's talk about his passive. Gibraltar's passive is his arm shield, and it's probably one of the best passives in the game. Gibraltar's arm shield projects a small shield in front of him that absorbs 60 damage from any incoming attacks that hit his torso. This is an exceptionally good passive in a game where winning a one-on-one fight is very important. Just the fact that he can absorb a whole sniper shot or like 3 L-star shots while he's shooting at you is a big deal. Combined with the fact that Gibraltar just for some reason takes 15% less damage than every other character, it makes Gibraltar exceptionally good at dueling. It also makes him very good at sniping. Basically, it's just good at every point in the game, and he gets it effectively for free. Now, there is a little counterplay to it. Of course, you can aim at his head, which not only gives you more damage in general, but also avoids the shield entirely. But getting headshots in multiplayer FPS games is more difficult than not, so many of the times the shield will be relevant. Next up, let's talk about his tactical ability, the actual dome shield, what most people call either shield or bubble. Bubble is exceptionally good. Bubble not only frees up a lot of the competitive aspects of this game, which we'll talk about later, but it's also just an exceptionally good utility in a fight. Bubble effectively places down a little spot where your team is allowed to basically do whatever they want. It creates a space for you. Bubble basically puts down 360-degree cover wherever you want it, and this can be used for a number of different really good applications. Just having it can place your enemies in a lot of bad positions, and it gives you a lot of control over the fight. Not to mention it can allow you to revive people faster, lets you do things like scan recon beacons for free. Finally, we will talk about his ultimate. Gibraltar's ultimate is probably what really completes him and makes him a perfect character, which again we'll talk about in a moment. Gibraltar's ultimate is an area denial damage ultimate, similar to Bangalore's or Caustic's. His ultimate is probably the strongest out of the three because not only is it big enough to be relevant in most cases, but it's also quite fast unlike Bangalore's and has a lot more damage than Caustic's does outside of the final ring. Compared to Bangalore's, it's far more likely to actually knock somebody down or damage them. It's far faster, and basically just immediately forces your enemies to either move or to take damage, which are two bad situations. The only real weakness it has is that it can't hit people who are inside of buildings, but that is also somewhat of a strength because that means that if you're inside of a building, which most competitive games have a lot of that means that you can place it on yourself and keep your team safe from anybody who's trying to get inside, or force one of their members inside of your building and then you can just shoot them. Now, all of these are incredibly powerful abilities, especially in combination. However, I'm going to say that Gibraltar doesn't actually need a nerf. Gibraltar's pick rate is not a result of his strength, it's actually just a result of the fact that he is basically necessary in competitive Apex. Gibraltar actually makes competitive Apex a lot better. He increases the freedom of the game. He allows for many plays that otherwise aren't possible because he does what teams need him to do. And he's the only character who does it, which is why people pick him so much. And the thing that he does is that he creates space. Gibraltar allows for plays that are otherwise extremely dangerous because he creates space for his team. He makes it so that you can run between two pieces of cover in no man's land and not immediately just get shot to shit, allowing players to make more aggressive plays than they otherwise would be able to. Because his space that he creates is absolute and is immediate, then it allows teams to push other teams, to run between pieces of cover when their piece of cover is no longer viable, or to do things like ping rings. In competitive Apex, aggression is often not the most viable way to play the game. That isn't to say that people can't play aggressive and find success, it's just that there's an inherent risk to playing aggressively and fighting people. There's also an inherent risk to not being in cover. A lot of competitive Apex is spent in cover, usually hunkered down in buildings or in otherwise good positions inside of the ring, simply because those are strong positions to play from. Moving in between two positions and being out in what I like to just call no man's land is almost a death sentence because at that level of play, people are hitting their shots. So if you're running between two places with cover where there is basically no cover, you could pretty much just die. Either you'll have your team like all cracked or someone will get downed and then you'll just get pushed. However, because of Gibraltar, you can create space for your team that makes these plays more viable. For example, if somebody Gibraltar ultimates your nice piece of cover, you can use the shield to prevent yourself from just dying or having to run out and then dying to getting shot. If you want to push somebody, you can throw down the shield and use that as a piece of cover that you can use to fight through, also providing your team a serious amount of utility in that upcoming fight, because the enemies have to fight around your shield. If you need to run from one place to another, you can bubble in the middle, heal up, and then make it to the other spot, effectively cutting in half the distance you'd have to run through no man's land. If Gibraltar weren't capable of doing this, then the game would be far more influenced by the first ring. People would be sitting in buildings far more often and for longer periods of time, more so than they already are. Whether or not that's a good thing is another topic entirely, but Gibraltar allows people to make aggressive and risky plays, and I think, in my opinion, those have a place in the game. Without the ability to do that, people who play more aggressively or who play edge or something like that aren't going to be nearly as viable, and it'll mostly just come down to whichever team gets the best position first for the final ring. And like I said, whether or not this is a good thing is a completely different discussion that goes into what we want out of competitive Apex, but in my opinion, aggression and risk are inherent factors to basically any game, and they have a place in viability. I think that if teams want to play risky or want to play more aggressive, they should be allowed to do so. It shouldn't just be a matter of who gets the best position for the final ring, as those are sort of inherent kinds of playstyles that I think should be allowed to flourish. It's already difficult enough to play aggressive in Apex as it is. Taking risks is inherently a huge risk in this game because it is sudden death. You have one life, or at least your team does. So Gibraltar freeing up the game a little bit and allowing people to play like that is probably a good thing in my opinion. It's not that it makes this strategy more dominant, it just makes it possible. And obviously the alternatives to this, the more defensive strategies, the ones based on good rotations and getting good positions, are still completely viable. They're still dominant in fact, and they're still very important, but I think there's room for an alternative. I don't think there should just be one way to play this. Gibraltar simply allows teams who want to play edge or who want to take more fights to have more viability. He allows you to make rotations that are slightly riskier or to make aggressive plays that are inherently risky without being completely punished just from the get-go. Gibraltar makes an entire style of play more arguable than it would be without him. For example, let's consider the choice of whether or not to third-party in comp. Unlike what we experience in ranked, third-partying in competitive is very different. It's a more calculated decision that has a lot of questions. If we third-party this team, where do we end up? Are we going to have a good position, or are we just going to get immediately killed? On our way to third-party, do we have enough cover or short enough distance to actually get there? If we go to third-party and we get fought off, what do? Are we giving up too good of a position to go in third-party? Is this worth the points? Are we taking out a team that is problematic for our standing? Do we need their armor or their weapons? Do we just need the points? Are we left out of the ring? Are we just going to get 4th or 5th or whatever partied? Ultimately, the question is it worth the risk? Because the difference between comp and even ranked is that in comp, everything has eyes and ears. There's more inherent risk to anything you do, even third-partying. Third-partying in competitive Apex is still fighting, and it has more risk than in lower levels of play, like in ranked or casual. Having Gibraltar's bubble alleviates and mitigates those risks, allowing for more aggressive styles of play. This is why I think that Gibraltar should probably be spared a nerf for a while, at least until some kind of alternative can come out. If they would change anything, I would say maybe nerfing Arm Shield down to 50 health is probably completely fair, and also I feel like area denial should not be on a character with a bubble as good as Gibraltar's. I think if they were to make future bubble characters, having a Gibraltar style ultimate would be fine as long as their bubbles aren't as strong as Gibraltar's. But I personally think that Gibraltar's ultimate should probably be changed the moment we get an alternative. I don't know what they could change it to, of course, I just don't think that area denial and a bubble should be something you get with one character. I feel like that's a choice you should have to make. At this point, Gibraltar's bubble and his ultimate have become sort of integral components of competitive play, even at higher level ranked, just because they're so ubiquitous. There's sort of an inevitability to having to deal with Gibraltar. And at the moment, I don't really mind that because Gibraltar isn't necessarily making the game just worse, he's making it mostly better. However, I definitely think there's room for alternatives. And I think that in light of such alternatives, that Gibraltar should probably lose his area denial ultimate. it should probably be a choice between having his great shield and also having his great ultimate. Though I think at the moment they're fine together because again, Gibraltar's kind of the perfect character. Now, with all of that being said, that doesn't mean that something doesn't need to be done, as I've mentioned. Gibraltar's unreasonably high pick rate is either symptomatic of him being too strong, or of other problems with the game overall. As much as Gibraltar is kind of carrying the game, he shouldn't have to be. Aside from just alleviating Gibby's dominance over the game, I think that Respawn needs to take a harder look and be more aware of what's valuable for a character to have in their game. Being able to create space is sort of a fundamental aspect of higher level play, and it's useful at every level of play. So it's kind of weird that only one character does this very well, and then other characters just kind of do it. Now, as I've implied here, there are other characters that do similar things to what Gibraltar does, just not as well. Watson, for example, has her ultimate, which does create space in a sense. It destroys all grenades and many ultimates that try to hit your team, however, you can just shoot through it. Bangalore has a similar sort of wall that she creates in the form of her smoke, but again, you can just shoot through it, and in many cases you can also just see through it. And Rampart's walls are just too slow and too weak. And this is much of the reason why Gibraltar doesn't really have any alternatives. It's also strange that a character who creates space also has area denial. I think things like area denial, space creation, and easy rotations are something you should have to compromise to get. It's not to say that hybrid characters shouldn't exist. Hybrid characters already exist. For example, Valkyrie and Pathfinder are both survey beacon characters and also rotation characters. I just think that having a character that does multiple things should come with a compromise of not doing them as well as other characters. And if Respawn is aware of this, if they are aware of what their characters need to provide for teams in the game, then it's very strange that Gibraltar is still the only character who makes any kind of space like this. Technically there is Watson, like I said earlier, but Watson actively doesn't work at the moment, so I don't think they really care about her. And even Watson doesn't really create space in the same way that Gibraltar does. However, the bottom line is this. Gibraltar does not necessarily need to be nerfed. In fact, you can't really touch him right now or it might ruin the game at its highest levels. At the lower levels, Gibraltar isn't nearly as dominant and isn't as powerful because people aren't utilizing him to his greatest efficiency. He's not being fully realized. And therefore, I don't think that nerfing him is really even going to do anything for the lower level players, except maybe upset some of them who already play Gibraltar. For higher level players, however, it has the risk of making the game less fun to play. So for the moment, we really shouldn't touch Gibraltar until we make some alternatives, which are desperately needed. If I were to change things around, and I know this will never happen, but if I were to change things around, I would say we should make an immediate alternative to Gibraltar as the next character, and give him Gibraltar's ultimate. Give him a weaker shield or a weaker space creation mechanism, and give Gibraltar some other kind of ultimate. Of course, I know that will never happen, but I still think there's definitely things that can be done about the game and that we can learn from Gibraltar to help us make patches going forward. I think the team over at Respawn should start to analyze what is valuable for their characters to have and to take that into account when they make a character. I'm not saying that they don't, I'm just saying it's been a long time since Gibraltar had any competition. Maybe they don't think that what Gibraltar does is inherently something that teams need, but if that weren't the case, then he wouldn't have a 90.2% pick rate. Now there are other things driving him up. His ultimate is ridiculous, his arm shield is very annoying, but these are only in a competitive setting. Gibraltar's ultimate is only really ridiculous when it gets to the final ring, and he's not alone in that. Bangalore, Caustic especially, have ultimates that scale. They get better the smaller the available space is because they are area denial. However, he's also by no means weak, and I hope that further awareness of what makes a character competitively viable will be taken into account when making characters in the future. There are, needless to say, a lot of characters that pretty much have no competitive future whatsoever outside of perhaps some kind of rework or insane buffs. With all that said, however, I think that I'm about done with this video. I think we've gone over just about everything we need to go over, and I appreciate that you've watched this far. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing because this is the kind of thing I'll be doing in the future.